Hi, and welcome to episode 3 of the Pharmacy Lounge podcast, Law and Ethics, with Paul Summerfield. Today, we talk about the case of the pharmacist who was caught in possession with, well, she's actually, the police actually witnessed her snorting heroin, Class A drug, and in possession of a Class C drug. Now, while a lot of us think that off duty after work, we can, we can just hang out with our friends, do drugs, and that's the end of that because we're not at work. But as you'll see in this case, whether you're on duty or off duty as a pharmacist, you are always a pharmacist, and the GPAC will always take the view that whether you're off duty or on duty, you are still a pharmacist and you expect to follow certain standards. So in this case, the pharmacist went to the Notting Hill Carnival with her friend in October 2010. She was arrested by police for possession of a Class A and Class C drug. She received a police caution for the offence of being in possession of a Class A and Class C controlled drugs. Now, in terms of the fitness to practice, she denies that she's not fit to practice because, again, she was off work and this doesn't affect her when she's on duty. So, Paul, tell us a bit more about this case and how she's managed to compartmentalize the whole thing and how she's turned herself around in the way she's conducted herself afterwards.
Yeah. So you summed up the case quite nicely there. Police caution for possession of controlled substances, Misuse of Drugs Act 71 came into play, Class A and Class C. So what actually happened then once she received the caution? So she received the caution and was then it was declared to the GPAC by the registrant. So it was a self-declaration under Rule 4 of the Fitness to Practice and Disqualification, etc. rules. You have to declare it within 7 days of the event occurring. And this was done so. So that added to the strength for this registrant's case. One thing the committee picked up on, which you've pointed out already, was that this registrant tried to compartmentalise their life. Inside of work, they're a pharmacist. Outside of work, they're not a pharmacist. And the committee were concerned with that approach. They turned around and said, well, I'm sorry, but once you become a pharmacist, you have to abide by the rules all of the time. And quite rightly so. So what did they actually mean by that? Case from a while back now called Bolton, which basically states that once you become part of a profession, you give away certain freedoms. That's the price of entry. And this was held to be in this case as well. You've signed up to be a pharmacist, you're on the register, you're expected to behave as a pharmacist whenever and wherever. So not only in the UK, but also anywhere in the world. In Article 51, the Pharmacy Order provides that anything which is committed, which could be classed as an offence in the UK, anywhere in the world, can fall squarely under Article 51, so it can be misconduct, and it can be impairment of fitness to practice. So what we've got here is we've got a registrant who initially denied that their fitness to practice was impaired. And the committee were concerned with this because you have a pharmacist who has used drugs illegally and has bought those drugs illegally when they're not at work. Now, the public would expect a pharmacist not to do that. And I'm sure the profession would expect a pharmacist not to do that. So the committee had to find impairment in order to be able to maintain public confidence in the profession, but also to uphold and declare proper standards as well. So they did find fitness to practice impaired on those grounds. Now, once you've found fitness to practice impaired, you can move on to the sanction stage. A lot of things going for this registrant. they had turned their life around. They had reflected on what they'd done, and they put things in place so that it wouldn't happen again. They wrote a reflective piece. They gave evidence which showed their reflections, which showed their remorse. But also, they gave in some very good testimonials, not only from individuals who knew them personally, but also from their employer. Now, what happened here was that the committee were very impressed with this, and this added to the strength of the registrant's case. So when it came to sanction, the committee had a number of options: do nothing, give a warning, give a conditions of practice order, give a suspension order, or remove from the register. The committee in this case decided, because of the way that the registrant had turned themselves around, had realised what they'd done was wrong, had reflected on that, but also had realised that not only was they had recognised what was wrong, but they also recognised the impact on the profession, not only from within the profession itself, but also the perception of the profession in the public's eyes. So they had a great level of insight. So because of that, this registrant received a conditions of practice order for 2 years. That was the only condition that was placed on this registrant, was that they had to undergo drug testing every 4 months for the life of the order. That doesn't seem an awful lot. And you think, well, that seems to get off fairly lightly on this one. But it's not. You've got to look at the financial implication of this as well. Now, hair testing costs £600 to £700 per test. Times that by 3, £2,100. Times it by 2, £4,200. Plus the cost of the representation at the review hearing near the end of the 2-year order, £1,500 to £2,000. So all in all, about £6,000. For what? Because they went out and thought they could party on down and not have any issues at all. Now, when you look at this was decided in 2011, so under the old standards. So under the new standards, let's look at this. So of course, it would be pharmacists are expected to behave professionally. We're not supposed to be running around buying illegal drugs and taking illegal drugs. Whether you call it illegal drug use, illicit drug use, or recreational drug use, it's illegal drug use. We're not to do that. The only times you take drugs is either self-medication with over-the-counter medicines for a genuine ailment or disease, or if it's on prescription. Okay, so the only times really we should be taking anything to do with what we dole out day in, day out. But also speaking up when things go wrong. Very important here. This registrant may have had an issue in relation to drug use. We don't know. It wasn't covered in the determination. But any form of drug use which is illegal, you need to speak up when things go wrong. You need to go and get help. You need to find out why you're doing that. And then you need to try and resolve why you're doing it and put things into place so that hopefully it doesn't happen again. So that's linking it into two of the standards, okay, from if it was decided today. Hopefully that covers the case in sufficient detail.
It does. So, I mean, obviously we've looked at the background of the case on why she felt she could take illicit drugs off after work, and we've linked it to the standards. What would you say is a main learning point from this case? Okay,
so the learning point, or to use another phrase, a take-home message from this, is that as pharmacists we need to behave professionally at all times. Now, thinking about a few years ago when these new standards in 2017 were brought in, the PDA actually brought a case against the GPHC and wanted a judicial review, which was dismissed. But they argued that for a pharmacist to behave as by the standards at all times was a ridiculous proposition, and that was thrown out at the application for the judicial review. And so the courts stated that, well, as a professional, you're expected to act as a professional not only when you're in work, but also outside of work. But they hinted at a pragmatic approach to these things. Of course, there can be no pragmatism around illegal drug use at all. And you need to delve into the reasons why that is. What the GPHC aren't saying is they aren't saying, come home after work, sit in front of the TV or go out for a meal, be in bed by 10 o'clock, wake up at 6 and do it all again, 7 days a week. They're not saying that. What they're saying is, be sensible. Don't do things which would bring the profession into disrepute, which would destroy or dent public confidence in the profession, which would destroy or dent the standards that the GPHC strive to uphold. A lot of people knock the GPHC, especially in recent times, but they're the regulator. They're there to regulate. They're not there to represent. So bear that in mind. Don't do stupid things. You'll be okay. If you push the boundaries and you're caught, and you will be caught at some point, then unfortunately you will have to answer to the GPHC. Just be sensible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that sums up the case quite nicely here. So we're trying to, for our viewers today, we're trying to do a new way of doing this podcast where we're trying to link in the cases with learning points and the standards. So that when you watch the podcast or listen to the podcast afterwards, you have a better understanding of how the different standards work and how the GPHC works and how the whole legal system works for the healthcare professionals, for the pharmacies. So over the next few weeks, we'll have some more similar cases. Well, not similar cases, but different cases, looking at different aspects of the profession and how its profession should behave. I mean, for our next episode, we have a really interesting one where we deal with a pharmacist who had a patient that wanted some EHC, and because of his religious convictions, he made some comments. Now, he did give her the EHC, but he still made his comments, and that again triggered a series of events. So that's coming up on our next episode. And so from myself and Paul today, we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.